Of all the presidents we've had in the last 60 plus years, he remains the most popular. And he was murdered in broad daylight. And somehow we still can't get closure on who did it, which is mind-boggling. And he had a relationship with Israel that has been, the details of which have been thoroughly suppressed. I mean, it is the big dark hole in American history. And it's amazing, 60 years, they're willing to admit the CIA was involved. They're willing to admit all kinds of things. They don't want to talk about JFK's attitude towards Israel. But it's something I want, if I may just respond to the clip that you just showed earlier. If I could give a historical context, the Zionists in the 1930s were very happy to be known as fascist Zionists or Zionist fascists. Now, obviously, that's not a popular term anymore. But in the 1930s, it was, hey, didn't have a bad rep. They were proud to be fascists.
היא הכנסה שמחויבת המציאות של מינימום אוכל ותרופות לאוכלוסייה בעזה, שום דבר מזה לא יגיע לחמאס. צה"ל פועל מאז אתמול עם 5 אוגדות ברצועת עזה בעוצמה שלא נראית בראשית המלחמה. והפעם השיטה המבצעית שונה לחלוטין ממה שהיה בעבר. לא עוד פשיטות עם כניסות ויציאות, אנחנו כובשים, מטהרים ונשארים עד להשמדת חמאס. בדרך אנחנו משמידים את כל מה שעוד נשאר מהרצועה, פשוט, כי הכל שם זו עיר טרור אחת גדולה. במסגרת המלחמה צה"ל מניע אוכלוסייה מאזורי הלחימה ולא משאיר אבן על אבן. אני אומר לכם, פשוט תסתכלו על הסרטונים של מה שקורה ברצועת עזה. האוכלוסייה תגיע לדרום הרצועה, ומשם בעזרת השם למדינות שלישיות. במסגרת תוכנית הנשיא טראמפ, זה שינוי של מהלך ההיסטוריה, לא פחות.
Now, here's where it gets relevant. They admired Mussolini a lot. And they admired Mussolini in particular because they liked the way he handled the Ethiopians. And Mussolini was one of the first monsters to do aerial bombardment of civilians. And the Zionists thought that was cool. And they actually went to Italy in large numbers. And they were befriended by Mussolini. And he actually admitted 100 of them, give or take, to the Italian Naval Academy to be trained in military operations. So these guys have been fascists and murderers from the beginning. What we're seeing today, this is what Mussolini would be doing, and there would be
way worse than what Mussolini would be doing.
Yeah, and there'd be elements in the Italian population, not all of them, who'd be cheering.
Right.
So that's a little background to our Zionist friends and their roots.
Yeah. What do you think, Aaron?
Well, I would say that he was, as you say, the most popular president by Gallup poll numbers. He had the highest average popularity rating, and then he was assassinated by the regime that we live under, which is pretty obvious because they've stonewalled so long for this. It's just, we're all pretending like, oh, it's a mystery. Are we going to know who did it? But in the bigger sense, we know that the regime... Yeah, I mean, the regime did it. What the problem is, we don't really understand the kind of regime that we have, because if it's lawful and democratic and transparent, then that does not go along with, what happened in Dallas in 1963. Looking back at what the Kennedy brothers were facing in that term, there is the criminal aspect of the United States as the global empire, the hegemon of global capitalism. And that is a role that cannot really be played without a whole lot of criminality. And in the CIA, they gave themselves the power to be above the law. One of the new documents declassified is from Arthur Schlesinger, and he was sort of the court historian of JFK's administration. He's a former OSS guy, not somebody that I am particularly fond of, but he's a liberal. He's a Cold War liberal. At the time, he wanted a big reorganization of the CIA after the Bay of Pigs, and he said the CIA is taking on all the characteristics of a state within a state. And what I have found recently, and I'm really building on the work of Peter Dale Scott, because he's the sort of master intellectual of this era, who was a great scholar, historian, social scientist, and poet, and a professor at Berkeley, who really made an astounding number of discoveries. So I don't want to be putting forward some of this baseline information and just pretending that I just discovered all this myself, because that's a common thing in the internet age. But Peter, if you read Deep Politics and the Death of JFK, I read it in 2010 the first time, and I have to admit that a lot of it was over my head. When it comes to Israel, he would not say things so explicitly. But if you go back and you read Deep Politics and the Death of JFK, you surmise that the Italian model of the organized crime syndicate, these Italian mobsters, La Cosa Nostra, this is something that the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and the FBI, they only admitted this kind of grudgingly in the 50s, but it was really much more than this. It was really more run by Lansky out of Vegas, and it also relied on the nationwide network of the Teamsters Union. And Hoffa, Jimmy Hoffa, and Meyer Lansky were both Mossad assets, essentially. They both were involved in shipping arms to Israel in 1948. And Hoffa visited Israel a number of times. Jimmy Hoffa Jr., he either runs or is a part of the Yitzhak Rabin Foundation today. I mean, this is a history that we have kind of forgotten. We've forgotten who Hoffa was and how RFK went after him. RFK was unique in going after the syndicate. He went after the Vegas crowd. They built up Las Vegas in the 40s to be the recipient, to be a conduit for drug money out of a connection set up in Mexico by Meyer Lansky and what you could call the Jewish mob. And this is really the source of what Las Vegas is. And then Teamster loans to build up casinos. And it's this massive money laundering center. Let me get back to the CIA within a CIA idea, Ken, and I think that you'll appreciate this. You not only had the CIA back then as a state within a state, but you had within the CIA James Angleton and his connection to Mossad, because he handled the Mossad account, which was a CIA within the CIA within the state. I mean, it was like a state within a state within a state. It was and it was tied to the crime syndicate, which was protected not just by James Angleton in counterintelligence, because he did stop an investigation into some money laundering that the Kennedys requested, but also Lansky was protected by J. Edgar Hoover and Harry Anslinger, the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. So essentially, you had this network within, protected by the highest echelons of the national security state, that protected the organized crime syndicate, and which was functionally a Mossad asset as well, which had implications in that they controlled the National Racing Wire Service, for example. And this was a kind of network of corruption and political corruption throughout the entire country that was essentially put to the service of Mossad if and when it needed to influence American politics. But if you fast forward to today, when they wanted to go after Assange in 2020, there's this Gray Zone article that says when they went after Assange, who did the CIA do to plan his assassination attempt, which they didn't carry out, thankfully, but also to illegally surveil him? Sheldon Adelson and his casino company, which is the biggest contributor to the Republican Party, using casino money from Macau. A lot of it. It's the Sands Company, which is an old Lansky outfit from Las Vegas. And this is all these years later. It's this. We have outsourced a lot of things to Israel. Epstein is another example. It seems the CIA outsourced the sexual blackmail aspect of its operations to Epstein, and that would likely be why he was protected. So Israel is a part of this dark criminal state within a state within a state that is a part of our regime that we just don't understand. And it's really staggering to think of the implications of it. And once JFK was assassinated, RFK never again met with his organized crime unit, because I think he knew that the mobsters had won. And this is really, the U.S. became pretty much a criminal enterprise full stop after that, because nobody could stand up to these people anymore.